What if everything you think you know about learning is completely wrong? What if the very foundation of human knowledge rests on a question that has divided the greatest minds for over 2,000 years? Tonight, we witness a debate that will shatter your assumptions about the nature of truth itself. Picture this: two intellectual giants, separated by centuries, locked in the most fundamental argument of human existence. On one side stands Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, who believed that knowledge springs eternal from within our souls. On the other, John Locke, the English empiricist who argued that our minds begin as blank slates, written upon only by experience. The setting is neither ancient Athens nor 17th century England, but a space beyond time where ideas themselves take form. A dimly lit chamber filled with the weight of centuries of human thought, where the greatest questions of existence hang in the air like incense. Here in this realm of pure intellect, these two titans of philosophy finally meet face to face. Plato enters first, his presence commanding yet serene. His eyes hold the depth of someone who has gazed upon eternal truths, who has seen beyond the shadows on the cave wall. He moves with the confidence of a man who believes he carries within him the very essence of reality itself. "My friend," Plato begins, his voice carrying the authority of ages, "you arrive just as I was contemplating the prisoners in the cave. Tell me, do you truly believe that what we call learning is nothing more than the accumulation of shadows on the wall?" Locke steps forward, his demeanor practical yet intellectually fierce. Where Plato radiates metaphysical certainty, Locke embodies the spirit of observation and reasoned inquiry. His eyes are sharp, accustomed to examining the world as it is, not as philosophy might wish it to be. "Shadows, you say?" Locke responds, settling into his chair with the ease of a man comfortable with worldly realities. "I see no shadows here, Plato. I see two minds, each formed by countless experiences, countless observations, countless moments of learning through trial and error. If you seek truth, look not to some mystical realm of perfect forms, but to the evidence of your senses." The air between them crackles with intellectual tension. This is not merely an academic exercise, but a battle for the very soul of human understanding. How we answer this question shapes everything: how we educate our children, how we pursue science, how we understand consciousness itself. Plato leans forward, his expression both amused and pitying. "Evidence of the senses. My dear Locke, you speak as one still chained in the cave, mistaking the flickering images for reality itself. Tell me, when a child first encounters the concept of justice, of beauty, of mathematical truth, do they truly learn these from the corrupted world around them? Or do they recognize something eternal that was always within them?" "They learn," Locke fires back without hesitation, "through observation, through experience, through the careful accumulation of sensory data. A child knows nothing of justice until they witness fairness and unfairness in action. They understand beauty only after seeing beautiful things. Mathematics emerges from counting objects, measuring distances, observing patterns in the world." But Plato shakes his head, a knowing smile playing at his lips. "Then explain to me, friend, how that same child can understand perfect geometric forms that exist nowhere in our imperfect world. How can they grasp the concept of absolute equality when no two objects are ever perfectly equal? How can they comprehend infinity when they have never experienced anything infinite?" The question hangs in the air like a challenge thrown down between gladiators. Locke's eyes narrow, recognizing the sophistication of his opponent's argument, but far from conceding defeat. "Because," Locke says slowly, deliberately, "the human mind has the remarkable capacity to abstract, to generalize from particular experiences. We see many examples of rough equality and form the abstract concept of perfect equality. We observe many instances of beauty and develop our sense of aesthetic truth. The mind is not born knowing these things. It develops the capacity to understand them through experience." "Ah, but there you reveal the fundamental flaw in your reasoning," Plato counters, his voice rising with passion. "You speak of the mind's capacity as if it were some neutral vessel, but capacity itself implies structure, implies innate potential. A blank slate cannot suddenly develop the ability to reason about eternal truths unless those truths were already written in the very fabric of the soul." The debate has begun in earnest, and already the fundamental chasm between their worldviews becomes apparent. For Plato, knowledge is recognition, the soul remembering eternal truths it once knew in a realm beyond the physical. For Locke, knowledge is construction, the mind building understanding from the raw materials of sensory experience. But this is more than philosophy for philosophy's sake. The implications ripple outward into every aspect of human existence. If Plato is right, education becomes a process of drawing out what is already within. If Locke is correct, education must focus on providing rich experiences from which knowledge can be built. The chamber seems to pulse with the weight of the question. Two of history's greatest minds, two fundamentally different ways of understanding reality, preparing for intellectual combat that will reveal the very nature of human consciousness itself. The philosophical atmosphere grows thicker as both men settle into their positions, each drawing upon centuries of thought that followed in their wake. Plato's fingers trace abstract patterns in the air, as if drawing upon invisible geometries that only he can see. Locke, meanwhile, plants his feet firmly on the ground, his posture embodying his commitment to the tangible world of experience. Let us begin with something concrete, Locke suggests, his voice cutting through the metaphysical haze. Take language itself. When a child speaks their first word, are you suggesting they remember this from some eternal realm, or do they learn it through repeated exposure, through watching mouths move, through hearing sounds connected to objects and actions? Plato chuckles, a sound that seems to echo with ancient wisdom. Language, yes. Let us examine language. But look deeper, my empirical friend. How does a child learn not just words, but grammar? How do they instinctively understand the deep structures that make communication possible? No parent teaches a toddler the infinite complexity of linguistic rules, yet children master them with an ease that suggests something far more profound than mere imitation. They learn through pattern recognition, Locke responds firmly. The human brain is remarkably adept at detecting regularities in experience. Children hear thousands of sentences, observe how words relate to each other, and gradually internalize the patterns. It is learning, pure and simple, sophisticated learning, but learning nonetheless. Pattern recognition, Plato muses, stroking his beard thoughtfully. But tell me, what enables pattern recognition itself? You speak as if the mind comes equipped with this miraculous ability to find order in chaos, to extract universal principles from particular instances. Is this not itself evidence of innate structure, of knowledge that precedes experience? The challenge hits its mark and Locke pauses, considering. The silence stretches between them, filled with the weight of millennia of philosophical debate. When Locke speaks again, his voice carries a new edge of determination. The capacity to learn is indeed innate. I do not deny this, but capacity is not knowledge. A newborn has the capacity to walk, but walking itself must be learned through practice, through trial and error, through experience. The mind has evolved to be a learning machine, but it begins its work with no content, no pre-existing ideas. Evolved, Plato seizes on the word. You use the language of change, of development over time. But evolution itself suggests purpose, suggests forms toward which things naturally develop. The acorn contains within it the oak tree, not as completed knowledge, but as essential nature. Perhaps the soul contains within it the seeds of all truth, waiting for the right experiences to awaken them. Locke leans back, his expression showing both respect for his opponent's cleverness and frustration at what he sees as mystical obfuscation. You speak beautifully, Plato, but where is your evidence? Show me this realm of eternal forms. Point to this innate knowledge that supposedly exists independent of experience. I see only neurons firing in response to stimuli, only minds building understanding brick by brick from sensory input. Evidence? Plato's eyes flash with something between amusement and indignation. You demand evidence from the senses to prove truths that transcend the senses. It is like asking a blind man to describe color, or demanding that someone prove mathematics by weighing numbers. The very fact that you can conceive of perfect mathematical relationships that exist nowhere in the physical world should tell you that mind touches something beyond mere material experience. The philosophical tension ratchets higher as both men reveal the full scope of their disagreement. This is not simply about learning or education. It is about the fundamental nature of reality itself. Plato's universe is one where eternal truths exist independent of the material world, where the soul has access to knowledge that transcends physical experience. Locke's universe is materialistic, grounded in the belief that all knowledge ultimately derives from sensory interaction with the physical world. Consider mathematics, Plato presses on, sensing an advantage. A child can understand that 2 plus 2 equals 4, not because they have experienced every possible instance of this equation, but because they recognize an eternal truth. They know that parallel lines never meet, not because they have measured every possible parallel line, but because they grasp a perfect geometric principle that exists beyond the imperfect approximations found in nature. Mathematics, Locke responds with growing passion, is precisely where your argument fails most completely. Children learn to count by counting objects, fingers, toys, pieces of food. They develop understanding of addition by physically combining groups of things. They grasp geometric principles by observing spatial relationships in the world around them. Every mathematical concept builds upon sensory experience, elaborated through reason but grounded in observation. Then explain to me, Plato challenges, his voice now carrying the full authority of his philosophical tradition, how we can have knowledge of perfect circles when no perfect circle exists in nature, how we can understand infinite sets when we have never experienced anything infinite, how we can grasp logical principles that apply universally when our experience is always particular and limited. The question cuts to the heart of one of philosophy's deepest puzzles. How do finite beings with limited experience come to understand universal and eternal truths? How do we move from the particular to the universal, from the experienced to the necessary? Locke straightens, his face set with determination. The real battle is about to begin, and both philosophers know that the stakes could not be higher. They are fighting not just for their own positions, but for entire ways of understanding human nature, education, science, and the possibility of knowledge itself. The chamber seems to hold its breath as these two intellectual giants prepare to dive deeper into questions that have shaped human civilization for thousands of years. The debate is no longer merely academic. It has become a contest for the soul of human understanding. Plato rises from his chair, his movement graceful yet charged with intellectual energy. The ancient philosopher begins to pace, his hands gesturing as if he were sculpting ideas from the very air around him. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of someone who has glimpsed truths beyond the ordinary world. My friend Locke, you ask for evidence of eternal truths, but you seek them in precisely the wrong place. You look outward when you should look inward. You examine the shadows when you should turn toward the light. Plato stops pacing and fixes Locke with an intense stare. Let me tell you what I see when I observe human learning, and it is nothing like the blank slate you describe. I see a slave boy in Athens who has never studied geometry, yet when questioned properly, discovers the principles of mathematical proof within himself. I see children who instinctively understand fairness before anyone teaches them about justice. I see lovers who recognize beauty, not because they have catalogued beautiful objects, but because beauty itself calls to something eternal within their souls. Locke shifts in his chair, clearly skeptical, but willing to hear his opponent out. Your slave boy learns through questioning, through having his thinking guided by a teacher. This is education, not mystical recollection. Ah, but there lies your blindness, Plato exclaims, his eyes lighting up with passionate conviction. The teacher adds no new information, teaches no facts, provides no sensory experiences. He merely asks questions that allow the boy to discover what was already within him. If the mind were truly a blank slate, questioning alone could never produce knowledge. You cannot draw water from an empty well. Plato begins to pace again, his movement hypnotic, almost dance-like. Consider this. When you first encountered the concept of perfect justice, what happened in your mind? Did you slowly accumulate examples of just and unjust acts until you gradually constructed the abstract idea? Or did you recognize something that allowed you to judge those very acts as just or unjust in the first place? The question strikes deeper than Locke expected. For a moment, his empirical certainty wavers as he considers his own experience of understanding universal concepts. Recognition, Plato continues, pressing his advantage, requires pre-existing knowledge. You cannot recognize what you have never known. When the mind grasps eternal truths, mathematical principles, logical relationships, moral absolutes, it does not learn them for the first time, it remembers them. Remembers from where? Locke demands, his voice sharp with frustration. From what mystical realm do these memories supposedly come? Plato's expression grows serene, almost otherworldly. From the realm of forms, where the soul dwelt before its imprisonment in the physical body. There, beyond the corrupting influence of material existence, the soul knew directly the perfect exemplars of all truth, perfect justice, perfect beauty, perfect goodness, perfect unity. What we call learning is actually the soul's struggle to remember what it once knew clearly. This is fantasy, Locke protests, but there is something in his voice that suggests Plato's vision has touched a nerve. Pure, philosophical speculation without a shred of evidence. Without evidence? Plato's voice rises with indignation. The evidence surrounds you. How else do you explain the human capacity for mathematics, which deals with perfect abstractions that exist nowhere in the physical world? How do you account for moral intuition, which allows us to recognize ethical truths that no amount of sensory experience could teach? How do you understand aesthetic judgment, which perceives beauty in ways that transcend mere physical properties? Plato stops pacing and leans toward Locke, his intensity almost overwhelming. You speak of evolution, of the mind as a learning machine, but consider this. Evolution supposedly selects for survival advantages. What survival advantage could there be in understanding infinity, in grasping perfect geometric forms, in yearning for absolute justice? These capacities point beyond the material world. They are windows into eternal truth. Your slave boy example, Locke responds, grasping for solid ground, can be explained without mystical memories. Humans have innate logical capacities. I grant you that. But logical capacity is not the same as innate knowledge. The boy can reason about geometric relationships because reasoning itself is a natural faculty, not because he remembers eternal geometric truths. Logical capacity, Plato muses, turning the phrase over as if examining a precious stone. You grant me logical capacity as innate, but you refuse to see what this concession implies. Logic deals with necessary relationships, with universal principles that hold across all possible worlds. If the capacity for logic is innate, then the mind has native access to universal truth. You cannot separate logical capacity from logical content. They are aspects of the same eternal reality. The philosophical pressure builds as Plato's vision takes on increasing coherence and power. He paints a picture of human consciousness that is both exalted and tragic. Exalted because it connects us to eternal truth, tragic because our physical existence obscures our divine nature. Every moment of genuine learning, Plato continues, his voice now almost hypnotic, is actually a moment of recognition, of remembering. The student's face lights up, not because new information has been added, but because something eternal has been awakened. The aha moment of discovery is the soul recognizing its own deepest nature. And education, he adds, his tone growing more practical, should therefore focus not on filling empty vessels with information, but on drawing out what is already within. The teacher is a midwife, helping to birth knowledge that the soul already possesses. This is why true education transforms rather than merely informs. It awakens divinity within humanity. Locke listens with growing unease, recognizing both the seductive power of Plato's vision and its dangerous implications. If Plato is right, then empirical science, careful observation, and gradual accumulation of knowledge are secondary to mystical insight and philosophical contemplation. The entire enterprise of modern learning could be fundamentally misguided. But Plato is not finished. His eyes gleam with the fervor of someone convinced he possesses ultimate truth, and he prepares to deliver what he believes will be the decisive blow in their debate. Locke has remained remarkably composed throughout Plato's passionate exposition, but now something shifts in his demeanor. His jaw sets with determination, and when he stands, there is a firmness in his posture that suggests he will no longer yield ground to mystical speculation. The practical English philosopher draws upon centuries of scientific advancement that followed his work, armed with a worldview that demands evidence and abhors unfounded assumption. Plato, Locke begins, his voice calm but cutting, you paint a beautiful picture, poetic, inspiring, almost intoxicating in its grandeur. But it is precisely that, a picture, a story, a myth dressed up as philosophy. You ask me to accept on faith the existence of a realm of perfect forms, eternal souls and mystical memories, all without providing a single verifiable fact. Locke begins his own measured pacing, his movements deliberate and grounded. Let me tell you what I see when I observe human learning, and I see it not through the lens of wishful thinking, but through careful, systematic observation of actual human beings in actual circumstances. I see infants who must learn the most basic distinctions, hot from cold, sweet from bitter, mother from stranger. I see children who acquire language not through mystical recollection, but through thousands of repetitions, corrections, and gradual approximations. I see students who master mathematics not by remembering eternal truths, but by working through countless problems, making errors, and slowly building understanding through practice. Plato interrupts, "But you cannot explain—" "Let me finish," Locke says firmly, his patience finally showing strain. "You speak of your slave boy discovering geometry, but you ignore the crucial details. The boy had eyes to see the geometric figures drawn in the sand. He had experience with spatial relationships from moving through the world. He possessed a functioning brain capable of logical reasoning. None of this requires mystical pre-existence." Locke's voice grows stronger, more confident as he shifts into full argumentative mode. "Your error, Plato, lies in confusing the capacity to learn with pre-existing knowledge. Yes, humans are born with remarkable cognitive abilities, pattern recognition, logical reasoning, language acquisition, mathematical intuition, but these are biological endowments, products of evolutionary development, not memories from eternal realms. Consider your own examples more carefully," Locke continues, now directly challenging each of Plato's key points. "Mathematical knowledge builds systematically from simple sensory experiences. A child learns to count by manipulating objects, fingers, stones, toys. They develop understanding of addition by physically combining groups. They grasp subtraction by taking things away. Every abstract mathematical concept traces back to concrete physical experiences. Even geometry," Locke presses on, "emerges from spatial experience. Children play with shapes, observe how objects fit together, notice patterns in the arrangement of things. The abstract principles they eventually understand are sophisticated generalizations from countless particular experiences, not mystical revelations." Plato attempts to interject, but Locke is now in full flow, years of empirical conviction pouring out in response to what he sees as dangerous nonsense. "And as for moral knowledge, your supposed innate understanding of justice, observe children more carefully. They begin with pure selfishness, gradually learning through social interaction what behaviors lead to harmony and what behaviors lead to conflict. They develop moral intuitions through experiencing the consequences of actions, through observing how others respond to different behaviors, through slowly internalizing social rules that promote cooperation. A child does not recognize perfect justice," Locke argues with increasing passion. "A child learns that sharing toys leads to more pleasant play, that hitting others results in retaliation, that telling the truth generally produces better outcomes than lying. Moral understanding emerges from the accumulation of social experience, not from mystical recollection." Locke pauses, letting his argument settle, then delivers what he considers his most devastating criticism. "Your entire philosophy, Plato, is based on a fundamental confusion between explanation and mystery. When faced with the remarkable human capacity for learning, you do not seek to understand how it works. You simply declare it miraculous and invent an elaborate mythology to account for the miracle. But we no longer need mysteries," Locke continues, his voice now carrying the confidence of someone who believes he represents the future of human understanding. "We can study the brain, observe neural development, trace how experience shapes mental structures. We can watch learning happen in real time, measure its effects, understand its mechanisms. Your eternal realm of forms explains nothing because it cannot be tested, cannot be observed, cannot be verified." Plato's face shows a mixture of incredulity and something approaching pity. "You reduce the human soul to mere mechanism, divine knowledge to mere neural activity." "I elevate human achievement," Locke fires back. "Rather than attributing our remarkable capabilities to mystical gifts from eternal realms, I recognize them as the product of natural development, evolutionary refinement, and the incredible power of experience to shape understanding. We do not need to have been gods to become magnificent learners." The intensity in the chamber reaches a new peak as both philosophers realize they are not merely debating learning theory, they are fighting over fundamentally different visions of human nature itself. Locke's empiricism represents a view of humanity as naturally capable of achieving knowledge through reason and experience. Plato's rationalism presents humans as fallen beings, struggling to remember divine truths. "Your blank slate," Locke concludes with finality, "is not empty. It is potential, unlimited potential to grow, to learn, to understand, to create knowledge that never existed before. We do not need eternal truths because we can discover temporal ones. We do not need mystical memories because we can build real understanding. Experience is not a corruption of divine knowledge, it is the source of all genuine knowledge. The philosophical battle lines are now drawn with crystalline clarity, and both men prepare for the deeper engagement that will determine not just who wins this debate, but what it means to be human in the first place. The intellectual atmosphere in the chamber has become almost electric, charged with the fundamental tension between two irreconcilable worldviews. Both philosophers now understand that they are not merely debating technical points about learning theory, they are engaged in a battle for the very soul of human understanding. The stakes could not be higher. Plato's face shows a mixture of frustration and genuine bewilderment as he struggles to comprehend how anyone could be so blind to what seems to him obviously true. Locke, my friend, you speak of the brain as if it were some mechanical device, of learning as if it were mere data storage, of human consciousness as if it were nothing more than complex chemistry. Do you not see how this reduces the most magnificent aspects of human existence to mere material processes? When you listen to beautiful music, Plato continues, his voice taking on an almost pleading quality, do you really believe you are simply processing sound waves in ways that happen to evolve for survival advantage? When you contemplate mathematical truth, do you honestly think you are merely manipulating neural patterns that helped your ancestors navigate their environment? When you experience moral conviction, do you truly see nothing more than social conditioning dressed up as universal principle? Locke does not immediately respond, and in that pause, Plato senses an opportunity to press deeper into what he sees as the fundamental inadequacy of empirical philosophy. You accuse me of mysticism, Plato says, his voice growing more intense, but you are the one who requires miraculous explanations. You ask me to believe that mindless matter somehow organized itself into consciousness, that random evolutionary processes somehow produced creatures capable of understanding eternal mathematical truths, that social conditioning somehow generates genuine moral obligations that feel absolutely binding. Your materialism, Plato continues, warming to his theme, requires far more faith than my idealism. I simply acknowledge that that something eternal in the human soul can recognize eternal truth. You must somehow explain how temporal, physical processes can generate knowledge that transcends time and physicality. Locke's response when it comes is measured but forceful. What you call mysticism, Plato, I call honest acknowledgement of complexity. Yes, consciousness emerging from matter is remarkable, but it is a natural process we can study and understand. Yes, evolution producing minds capable of mathematics is extraordinary, but it follows comprehensible principles of development over time. Yes, social cooperation generating moral intuitions is amazing, but it is observable, testable, explicable. Your eternal realm, Locke counters, his voice sharpening, explains nothing because it can explain anything. Whenever human capabilities seem remarkable, you simply attribute them to mystical contact with perfect forms. This is not explanation. It is the abandonment of explanation in favor of comforting fantasy. The philosophical tension reaches a crescendo as both men realize they are defending not just ideas, but entire ways of being human in the world. For Plato, the empirical approach represents a tragic fall from grace, a willful blindness to humanity's divine nature. For Locke, the rationalist approach represents a dangerous retreat from reality into the comfortable but delusional realm of wish fulfillment. Let us test our approaches, Plato suggests, his tone becoming more practical but no less intense. How do you explain the child who displays moral conviction that goes against all social conditioning? The young person who risks everything for principles they claim to know are absolutely right, even when their entire society disagrees. Your empiricism predicts conformity, but we observe conscience that defies experience. And how? Locke responds immediately. Do you explain cultural variation in supposedly eternal moral truths? If justice, beauty, and goodness are universal forms, why do different societies develop such radically different ideas about what justice, beauty, and goodness require? Your universalism predicts uniformity, but we observe stunning diversity in human values and beliefs. Both men pause, recognizing that their opponent has landed a solid blow. The debate has reached the point where fundamental assumptions are being challenged, where neither side can simply assert their position but must grapple with serious difficulties in their worldview. Perhaps, Plato says slowly, his tone shifting towards something more reflective, the cultural variations you observe result from the soul's imperfect recollection, obscured by the corrupting influence of material existence. The eternal forms remain perfect and universal, but our access to them is limited by our embodied condition. And perhaps, Locke responds, matching Plato's more thoughtful tone, the moral convictions you observe result from deep emotional learning that transcends conscious social conditioning. A person might internalize principles so profoundly through experience that they feel eternal and absolute, even when they are actually the product of complex learning processes. The chamber seems to pulse with the weight of the question both men are now confronting. Is there any way to definitively resolve their disagreement? Are they doomed to talk past each other, each interpreting the same evidence through fundamentally incompatible frameworks? Here is what troubles me most about your position, Plato says finally, his voice carrying a note of genuine sadness. If you are right, then human life becomes merely a brief flicker of consciousness in an ultimately meaningless material universe. Our highest aspirations, our deepest insights, our most profound loves, all reduced to the accidental byproducts of evolutionary processes that care nothing for truth, beauty, or goodness. And here is what troubles me most about yours, Locke responds with equal gravity. If you are right, then human effort becomes ultimately futile. Why strive to understand the world through careful observation if eternal truths are already known through mystical insight? Why work to improve human conditions if our highest nature transcends material existence? Your idealism could justify indifference to the very real suffering of very real human beings. Both philosophers fall silent, each recognizing that their opponent has articulated something genuinely troubling about their own position. The debate has moved beyond simple disagreement into the realm where worldviews reveal their deepest implications for human life and meaning. The final phase of their confrontation is about to begin, and both men sense that something more than intellectual victory is at stake. The philosophical combat has reached an unexpected turning point. Both Plato and Locke sit in contemplative silence, the weight of their exchange settling between them like dust after a great collapse. Each has struck telling blows against the other's position, and both have come face to face with the serious limitations of their own worldviews. The chamber itself seems to hold its breath, waiting to see what will emerge from this moment of mutual recognition. Locke is the first to break the silence, his voice carrying a new quality, not defeat but a kind of philosophical maturity that comes from genuine engagement with a worthy opponent. Plato, he says slowly, I confess that your challenges to my position have forced me to think more deeply than I expected. When I observe human learning with complete honesty, I cannot deny that there are aspects that seem to transcend simple accumulation of sensory experience. The speed with which children master language, the universality of certain logical intuitions, the profound human hunger for meaning and purpose, these phenomena strain my purely empirical framework. Plato nods, his expression showing both surprise and respect for Locke's intellectual honesty. And I must acknowledge, he responds with matching candor, that your emphasis on observation and evidence has revealed weaknesses in my own approach. If knowledge truly comes from recollection of eternal truths, we should expect far more uniformity in human understanding than we actually observe. The cultural variations in belief, the obvious role of experience in shaping understanding, the clear evidence that learning often involves genuine novelty. These facts challenge my assumptions about innate knowledge. The philosophical atmosphere in the chamber begins to shift. Where before there was combat, now there is something approaching collaboration. Two brilliant minds working together to grapple with a problem that may be larger than either of their individual frameworks can fully contain. Perhaps, Locke suggests tentatively, we have both been partially correct and partially mistaken. I may have been too quick to dismiss the possibility of innate mental structures, while you may have been too eager to populate those structures with specific content. What do you mean? Plato asks, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Consider this possibility, Locke continues, his voice gaining confidence as he explores new intellectual territory. What if the human mind comes equipped not with innate knowledge, but with innate learning mechanisms of extraordinary sophistication? What if we are born not knowing eternal truths, but possessing the capacity to discover universal patterns in our experience? Plato strokes his beard thoughtfully. You suggest that the eternal forms might exist not as pre-given content in the soul, but as the organizing principles that allow the soul to recognize truth when it encounters it. Exactly, Locke says, his excitement growing. The child learning language does not remember eternal linguistic truths, but possesses innate grammatical principles, that allow them to extract universal patterns from particular linguistic experiences. The student grasping mathematical concepts does not recollect eternal mathematical forms, but employs innate logical structures that enable them to discover mathematical relationships in the world. Plato considers this carefully, his expression showing the intense concentration of someone grappling with genuinely new ideas. This would preserve what I see as most important about human rationality, our capacity to transcend mere sensory experience and grasp universal truths, while acknowledging what you see as most important about learning, its dependence on encounter with the world. Yes, Locke agrees enthusiastically, and it would explain both the universality you emphasize and the diversity I emphasize. Universal learning mechanisms would lead to universal capacity for certain types of understanding, but the specific content of that understanding would depend on experience and culture. But even as both men explore this potential synthesis, deeper problems begin to emerge. Plato furrows his brow as he considers the implications of this compromise position. Yet something essential is lost in this formulation, Plato says with growing concern. If truth is discovered rather than remembered, if universal principles are extracted from particular experiences rather than eternally known, then what guarantees the truth of our discoveries? How do we distinguish genuine knowledge from mere opinion if knowledge lacks eternal foundation? Locke recognizes the depth of Plato's concern. You worry that without eternal truth, we are left with only relative opinion, with no way to distinguish better from worse understanding. Precisely, Plato responds. If mathematical truths are simply sophisticated generalizations from experience rather than eternal realities, what makes them true? If moral principles are complex products of social evolution rather than divine knowledge, what makes them binding? Your empiricism may explain how we come to hold our beliefs, but it cannot explain why we should hold them. The synthesis that had seemed so promising moments before now reveals its own limitations. Even if Plato and Locke can agree on mechanisms of learning, they remain divided on the ultimate nature and authority of knowledge itself. But perhaps, Locke suggests, though his voice carries less certainty than before, we do not need eternal authority for knowledge to be valuable. Perhaps it is enough that our beliefs work, that they enable us to navigate the world successfully, that they promote human flourishing. Work for what purpose? Plato demands, his philosophical passion reigniting. Flourishing according to what standard? You cannot escape the need for objective truth by appealing to success or happiness, because you must first establish what counts as genuine success or real happiness. Without eternal standards, you are trapped in circular reasoning. The chamber grows heavy with the weight of their renewed disagreement. Just when it seemed they might find common ground, the deepest philosophical questions reassert themselves. Are there eternal truths that give knowledge objective authority, or must we content ourselves with beliefs that serve our purposes without ultimate foundation? Perhaps, Locke says finally, his voice carrying a note of philosophical exhaustion, this is a question that cannot be definitively resolved. Perhaps human beings are condemned to live with uncertainty about the ultimate nature of their own knowledge. Or perhaps, Plato responds with equal weariness, human beings are blessed with the capacity to seek eternal truth, even if they never fully attain it in this life. Both men sit in contemplative silence, each recognizing that their debate has pushed them to the very limits of human understanding. They have explored the foundations of knowledge itself and found not solid bedrock, but deeper questions that may have no final answers. The final phase of their encounter is about to begin, and both sense that it will determine not whether one of them wins, but whether human beings can live meaningfully with the mystery of their own consciousness. As the philosophical dust settles in the chamber, both Plato and Locke find themselves in a place neither expected when their debate began. The combative energy that had driven their earlier exchanges has given way to something deeper, a shared recognition of the profound mystery that surrounds human consciousness and learning. They sit across from each other not as adversaries, but as fellow travelers confronting questions that may be larger than any single philosophical framework can encompass. Plato breaks the contemplative silence first, his voice carrying a tone of philosophical humility that would have surprised anyone who knew only his earlier confident assertions. "John," he says, using Locke's first name for the first time, "we have traveled far together in this discussion, and I find myself in an unexpected place. I began confident that I could demonstrate the truth of innate knowledge, certain that careful argument would reveal the eternal foundations of human understanding. Instead, I discover that even my most cherished insights remain shrouded in mystery. Locke nods slowly, his own expression reflecting similar philosophical transformation. And I began convinced that careful empirical analysis could resolve all questions about learning and knowledge. I believed that by tracing every idea back to sensory experience, I could provide a complete account of human understanding. Instead, I find myself confronting aspects of consciousness that seem to transcend any purely material explanation. The two philosophers look at each other with mutual respect, each recognizing that their opponent has forced them to think more deeply and honestly than they had before. The debate has not produced a clear winner, but it has produced something potentially more valuable, a clearer understanding of the questions themselves. What strikes me most forcefully, Plato continues, is how our different approaches each illuminate certain aspects of human learning while obscuring others. My emphasis on eternal truth helps explain the universality and authority of certain forms of knowledge, but struggles to account for the obvious role of experience and culture in shaping understanding. Your emphasis on empirical learning explains the diversity and development of human beliefs, but struggles to account for their apparent objectivity and universal validity. Yes, Locke agrees, and perhaps this itself teaches us something important. Perhaps the human mind is so complex, so remarkable, that no single perspective can capture its full nature. Perhaps we need both approaches, yours and mine, to approach anything like adequate understanding. But even as they move toward this modest conclusion, both men recognize that certain fundamental questions remain unresolved and may be unresolvable. The question of ultimate authority haunts me, Plato admits. If we cannot ground knowledge in eternal truth, if we cannot distinguish objective reality from subjective opinion, then what prevents human understanding from degenerating into mere preference and power? What protects the weak from the strong, the truthful from the deceptive, the wise from the ignorant? Locke considers this deeply before responding. And the question of human dignity haunts me. If consciousness is merely the product of material processes, if our highest aspirations are merely the accidental byproducts of evolutionary history, then what gives human life meaning? What makes our struggles, our loves, our achievements anything more than sophisticated chemistry? The chamber fills with the weight of these ultimate questions. Questions that have driven human beings to philosophy, to religion, to science, to art, to every form of meaning-making that transcends mere survival. Both men realize they have pushed their debate to the very boundaries of what human reason can definitively establish. Perhaps, Plato suggests slowly, the very fact that we can ask these questions points towards something beyond material existence. The capacity to wonder about eternal truth, to seek objective knowledge, to hunger for ultimate meaning. These seem to suggest that human consciousness touches something that transcends the purely physical world. Or perhaps, Locke responds with equal thoughtfulness, the very fact that we must ask these questions, that we cannot simply know the answers through mystical insight, suggests that we are indeed material beings, using natural capacities to make sense of a world that offers no pre-given meanings. Perhaps the questions themselves are evidence of our remarkable but entirely natural ability to seek understanding. Both positions remain logically possible, both remain emotionally compelling, and both remain ultimately unprovable by any method that would satisfy a truly rigorous skeptic. We seem to have reached, Plato observes with a slight smile, what might be called the limits of philosophical argument. We have pushed our reasoning as far as it can go, and we find ourselves still confronting irreducible mystery. Yes, Locke agrees, returning the smile, and perhaps that itself is instructive. Perhaps human beings are creatures condemned to live with uncertainty about their deepest nature, blessed with the capacity to seek answers to questions that may have no final answers. As their encounter draws to a close, both philosophers recognize that something valuable has occurred, even though neither has definitively proven his position. They have engaged in the kind of serious philosophical conversation that honors both human reason and human mystery, that pushes understanding as far as it can go, while acknowledging the boundaries beyond which reason cannot venture. For those who will come after us, Plato says in closing, perhaps our debate offers not answers but better questions. Perhaps we can leave them with a clearer understanding of what is at stake when we ask whether knowledge comes from within or from without, whether truth is eternal or temporal, whether consciousness is divine or natural. And perhaps, Locke adds, We can leave them with an example of how human beings can disagree profoundly about ultimate questions while still respecting each other's intelligence and sincerity. Perhaps we can show that philosophical disagreement need not degenerate into intellectual warfare, but can elevate into collaborative inquiry into the deepest mysteries of human existence. The chamber begins to fade as these two great minds, separated by centuries but united in their commitment to understanding, take their leave of each other and of us. Their debate lives on wherever human beings wonder about the nature of their own knowledge, wherever teachers and students grapple with the mystery of learning, wherever anyone asks whether there are truths that transcend the particular accidents of time and place and culture. The question they posed remains eternally with us. Do we discover truth or create it? Do we remember eternal knowledge or build temporal understanding? Are we fallen gods struggling to remember our divine nature, or risen animals reaching toward meanings we must make for ourselves? The debate continues as it must in every classroom, in every laboratory, in every moment when a human mind encounters something new and wonders not just what it is, but how it comes to be known at all.